In the decline of the day, when the light surrenders to the tired copper of the evening, two travelers follow the silent road. The brightness fades slowly, as if the sky also carried their weariness. They do not walk only on the earth, they walk inside a loss they cannot yet name. The dust that rises at their feet is no heavier than the emptiness they carry in their hearts. An emptiness that is not rebellion, but confusion. Something was taken from them, a presence, a promise, and now only the stillness remains, accompanying everything that is wounded and has not yet understood its own wound. The road stretches without urgency, the silence grows around them, not to punish, but to remember. It is a silence that extends like the interval between a gesture and its revelation. In them, the memory of the recent death still pulses, not as despair, but as shadow. A shadow that does not suffocate, but will veil the mystery that is to come. The twilight light weighs upon the earth like an incomplete blessing. The exhausted gold of the horizon seems to contain a hidden truth, as if the sky continued observing something they do not see. And every step echoes within them, not as affirmation, but as search. The air carries the discreet scent of damp earth and wood burning in the distance. There is shelter somewhere ahead. There is fire lit, even if they do not know that this flame will be the beginning of a recognition. Everything moves towards something none of them could predict. Thus the path opens, between the end of a hope and the beginning of a premonition. The twilight is not just the decline of light, it is the threshold where that which died begins, silently, to be reborn. In the interval between loss and revelation, something invisible awakens. It is here, on this border between shadow and trembling clarity, that the narrative finds its first breath. Before us, the supper at Emmaus stands up not as a work of art, but as a threshold. Here, the everyday and the eternal touch. The simple table becomes an altar, and the inn, a passing temple. The canvas does not merely represent, it has a premonition. And what it has a premonition of is the proximity of a mystery that reveals itself with the delicacy of a flame that does not dare to dissipate the twilight. Observe how the light lingers only where necessary, over the broken bread, over the suspended gesture, over the surprised faces. This light does not invade, it touches. It is a timid clarity, advancing as if asking permission, reminding us that the sacred rarely erupts with violence, rather, it insinuates itself, silently, in the midst of all that is fragile. The darkness that envelopes the scene is not imposed as absence, but as presence, a dense, almost living presence, which guards the instant when the visible world bows to the invisible. It is the same darkness that follows moments of loss, when the soul has not yet understood that the light, although veiled, remains. The shadow does not denounce, it prepares. The entire composition breathes contrition. Not a contrition marked by explicit guilt, but by the awareness of one's own smallness before grace. The painting calls us not as one who demands an answer, but as one who offers shelter. It suggests, come in. Sit down. Listen. Something is being revealed, and this revelation occurs to the extent of the inner silence you allow to be born. Here, the painting whispers, there is a moment when the human gaze opens not by force, but by meekness. And that moment is now. The table, at first glance, is modest. Nothing about it stands out, except the way it allows itself to be enveloped by the discreet approach, becoming a discreet refuge in the heart of the inner night. It is a narrow space, almost shapeless, where spiritual disillusionment rests, heavy, like a weariness that finds no words. Yet it is here, in the poverty of simple things, that the mystery chooses to alight. Upon the bread rests a light that does not belong only to the flickering flame. It is a light born of a presence that touches the wound of hope, still open, still uncertain, still burning on the boundary between faith and weariness. Around the bread, the silence deepens, as if the entire work breathed while awaiting the instant the gesture will be fulfilled. This is the silent center of the painting, the suspended moment in which the breaking of the bread approaches. An ancient, almost primordial gesture, charged with the memory of a surrender that the world has not yet fully comprehended. It echoes the weight of the recent tomb, it echoes the absence that still inhabits the disciples, it echoes the faith that tries to be reborn, but still wavers under the weight of loss. The hands, extended in the incomplete gesture, speak without a voice. They invite us to cross the threshold where the everyday bows to the mystery, and where the weary heart begins to sense what it still does not dare to affirm. It is an intimate invitation, almost secret, to recognize that the inner night will not be ripped out, but illuminated from within. The disciples lean in, and their faces gradually emerge from the twilight, as if called by a discreet, yet insistent light. There is hesitation in their eyes, not the hesitation of fear, but that of those who have walked long corridors of inner disillusionment. Something in them seeks, even without knowing what they seek. Something moves, though still wrapped in veils. The light that touches their countenances does not fully enlighten them, it only delineates the luminous breach that still pulses, still bleeds in silence. It is the instant when the heart senses before the mind comprehends, the instant prior to the name, prior to the recognition. The painting captures this threshold as if it were capturing the very moment when faith, weary, tries to rise again. In their eyes, the spectator finds the gentle tension between what has already died and what is trying to be reborn. There is doubt, but not defeat. There is search, but not despair. The weight of the recent tomb still rests upon the spirit, like a shadow that does not accuse, but only remembers. A shadow that, paradoxically, prepares the ground for the clarity that is about to emerge. The features revealed by the trembling clarity show this silent conflict, eyes that turn towards the invisible, hands that begin to move, breath that withdraws like someone awaiting something they cannot describe. It is a moment of pure transition, the narrow boundary where disillusionment meets the first breath of a recognition that has not yet flowered, but is already insinuating itself. The work invites us to inhabit this hesitation. Not as a distant spectator, but as someone who knows the intimate shadow and learns, in the silence, to distinguish the faint kindling of a presence that was always near. The Christ remains still, immersed in a silence that does not weigh down, but attracts, like a hidden center in the heart of the inner night. He does not claim, does not conquer, does not rise above the sacred despair that envelopes the scene. He merely allows himself to be seen, though veiledly, letting the gesture be the revelation, the thin thread that stitches the ardent fissure of faith, previously exposed to the cold twilight of staggering belief. The blessing is born as a voiceless murmur, slow, contained, guarded by the shadows that hold the memory of a tomb still ajar. The breaking of the bread becomes the luminous axis of the work, an instant that does not shine, but burns deeply, like embers under ancient ashes. There, in the gesture that evokes surrender and return, the light seems to sprout from within, insinuating a presence that touches the darkness without dissolving it, transfiguring it into a silent dwelling. The face of Christ, when finally revealed, carries not triumph, but a vulnerable serenity, like one who knows the weight of nights when prayer remains suspended, without clear answer. His eyes, dark, silent, profound, pierce the disciples' hesitation and rest where the human heart most fears to look, on that threshold where recognition is not sudden, but gradual, like the blossoming of a wound that becomes a door. The painting captures this instant with almost liturgical precision, allowing eternity to touch time without clamor, as if a veil fell unnoticed. There is an instant when everything withdraws, and, in this withdrawal, the light sprouts. It is not a flash, it is not a rupture. It is an unveiling that insinuates itself, as if grace found a secret path to flourish in the veiled depths. Recognition is born from this discreet touch, infiltrating the fissures of spiritual disillusionment and reaching the vulnerable flame, previously exposed to the cold. In the silence after the misunderstood miracle, the soul perceives what the mind hesitated to admit, as if the very darkness that gave way, still ajar, still dark, began to yield to the lightness of a breath coming from beyond. The moment is brief, yet vast. A second that contains the threshold between the twilight of staggering faith and the dawning of a light that does not boast, but persists. The disciples see, not by effort, but because the gesture tears the mist, revealing a presence that offers itself and withdraws in the same breath. Here, the painting captures the tension between the apparition and the disappearance, between the certainty that begins to be born and the shadow that still remains at the margin, guarding the mystery with modesty. This is how the risen one allows himself to be recognized, not by full vision, but by the hidden ember that endures afterward, like concealed coals under ancient ashes. The instant of revelation remains engraved in the inner silence, echoing as a truth that is not explained, but received, fragile, discreet, immensely real. He disappears. Not as one who abandons, but as one who withdraws into the invisible after marking the innermost being. His presence dissolves into the twilight, leaving behind a charged emptiness, where silence breathes slowly, suspended between the absence and the echo of something that touched the soul without noise. The weariness of the spirit, which previously weighed like cold stone, begins to yield before a silent fervor. A fire that demands neither form nor certainty, but insists on shining within, illuminating the wound of hope without fully closing it. This is the fulcrum of the instant. He is no longer at the table, and yet, everything remains impregnated with his passing. Grace, which does not speak loudly, leaves in the air a trace of depth, as if the silence of the moved stone, still half open in the human heart, breathed a breeze of life. The painting, then, seems to register this residue of the sacred, a silence that weighs, but purifies, an inner flame that does not devour, but sustains, a presence that, upon disappearing, ignites the interior with more force than any full vision could offer. The supper at Emmaus remains before us as more than an image. It is a call that touches the soul through the hidden side, where the intimate depth guards its own search. There is no noise, nor imposition, only the silent invitation to sit at the table where the everyday bows and the mystery insinuates itself. It is there, between shadows and suspended half-light, that spiritual disillusionment finds a crack, that the wound of hope receives a slow breath, not immediate cure, but a promise that pulses in the silence after the unheard of grace. The gesture, the bread, the gaze that almost sees, everything converges to this final instant, in which the work opens like a threshold. It does not close, it remains. It waits for the gaze that dares to cross the spirit's own fragile dawn, recognizing in the twilight a trace of light that does not dissipate the darkness, but inhabits it with delicacy. Thus, the silence of the moved stone is not a threat, but a passage, an invitation to an inner journey where the spirit, still marked by hesitation, finds a quiet ardor that sustains, purifies, and guides. The painting, in its deep silence, addresses the viewer like one extending an invisible table. Come. Remain. Let yourself be touched by what is not explained. Here, the mystery is not resolved, it is offered, slow and grave, asking only for a heart that listens. If this narrative lit something in you, there is much more waiting. Just remain. Subscribe to the channel.